what can we really say about the first point? So see, the first point is cultural legitimacy and human rights. Cultural legitimacy meaning that we are trying to legitimize why we practice certain cultures in the sense of protecting human rights. Okay, so we're trying to find a link in culture and human rights in the sense that let us continue to practice our cultures because they also link to human rights. Okay, so now the problems that were seen were that there is not enough research done when it comes to culture. Secondly, the research that is done is shown to be scanty. And thirdly, we have to break down again the levels of which we legitimize EEE culture in order for us to understand the root and the source of why we practice certain cultures. And in that way, we will be able now to form inquiries as to whether there is a link in human rights and culture. And those inquiries come in two forms. What's the inquiry? Firstly, may study a particular culture and ask what difference that culture makes to its carriers. And I was talking about virginity testing, saying that it makes a difference in the girls of in the lives of young girls because it encourages them to use their right of choice of waiting before they have sex, and therefore protects them from certain areas of life such as unwanted pregnancy and the infection of HIV and AIDS and other STDs. So, since now we find the goodness of that culture, it moves on to say, secondly, that inquiry may focus on the doctrinal components or manifestations of cultures in order to elicit their roles and potential, whether as resources or barriers in the fulfillment of human rights. So now, since we found the goodness of this human right, of this culture, we are now able to see this culture not as a barrier, but as a resource of what? Preserving the infection of HIV on young people and preventing them again from getting HIV and AIDS. Okay, so that is the first point. The first point was to legitimizing culture and linking it to human rights. Okay, can we move on to the second one? Okay, Masabatilana, the quest for congruence between culture and national human rights standards. So manje mayikhuluma nge-congruence, what do we mean? For equality. Yes, you can find a link. Now we're moving on to find a congruence. If something is congruent, it is in the same angle, meaning that we are in a mission now to try to find an equal standing of culture and national human rights standards. Okay. The quest for congruence or a common meeting point between cultural traditions and modern national and international legal standards is a theme of growing interest. In this discourse on the quest of congruence between culture and legal systems in recently liberated societies, draws attention to the fact that upon the attainment of independence, newly emerged nations often need to take a considered decision whether and to what extent they would wish to preserve their traditional values and cultural systems. So now, in the wake of new democracies in many African cultures and states, there was a question, we will see, okay fine, since we are moving forward in a political move, we are moving forward in a societal and an economic move, how far do we preserve, one, our cultures and traditions? Secondly, what is it do we actually preserve in our cultures and traditions? And thirdly, when we have done that, how do we do that? Okay. Once again, the opportunity to make the decision has been presented to more than 100 nations released from the bondage of colonialism since the beginning of the century. All have been faced with the challenge of maintaining cultural values while forging new institutions of nationhood. Their decisions are often translated into legal terms, whether constitutional or otherwise. In any event, it becomes part of the ongoing national discussion on the questions of cultural values and nation building. Into njengoba thina sizama ukubalansisa between political, societal and economical national building, how do we now include traditional and cultural national building? Because we have different cultures in our societies, but now we cannot abandon them just because we are diverse. And just because we are progressing and moving forward into a new system, a new way of life, and new generational values, we cannot extort them or extinguish them. They still play a role in our lives. Okay? So now, this is still a mission to try to find a meeting point. Once again, the extent to which new nations may comprise universal social and legal standards in the quest to uphold certain cultural traditions is inherent in this discussion. Some of the dominant arguments have been for more cultural consideration in the institutional choices of new nations. In his inaugural address in the 9th World Congress in the Contemporary Conceptions of Law in 1979, Greg Dorsey observed, "Peoples that have recently gained political independence have a special opportunity with respect to organizing and maintaining societies and legal systems." Okay, what is the first thing? What's the first thing here is abantu laba sebethole i-political independence have a special opportunity to respect to organizing and maintaining societies and legal systems. So it's covered when it comes to political legitimacy. It's covered when it comes to political and legal legitimacy as well. He moves on to say that it would be a tragedy if they would choose a philosophy of society and law because of a claim of universal validity, or in order to avoid being called backward or underdeveloped. It is such a fallacy for African states to think that in order for them to move forward, it is right for them to distort or to diminish their cultures and their traditions just because bafuna ukuba kuma standards of universal standards and political standards. And in order for them to get into an international link, it does not mean they should do away with their traditions and cultures just because they fear that European or Asian countries will see them as backward. Okay? It is not a means of being backward or not so progressive if we take our cultures and our traditions alongside with legal systems and political progress. Okay? Once again, there is a need. There is indeed a basis of the apprehension of that Dorsey expresses. Many of the problems that post-colonial states face might have been partially avoided if due attention had been paid to this problem. With specific regard to human rights, however, there are some limitations to the argument for absolute cultural relativism against universality. Universality. It's either you are totally cultural or you are totally universal. That is why there is no link between modernization and traditional values. That is not really true, because if we are to move forward, we have to move forward as we are. Okay? Once again, in recent years, the heavily polarized debate over the universality or cultural relativity of human rights has given way to a broad consensus that there are indeed a set of core universal human rights values to which humanity aspires. As Wementori puts it, today, internationalism is a potential reconciler. While countries would like to retain as large a part as possible of the traditional, the fact that we are one world community makes this difficult when those traditions are inconsistent with prevailing international concepts and attitudes. Once again, Wementori if we are to reach a meeting point, asingayitshela ukuthi ayikho indlela yokuthi simithe an equal standing point between culture and universalism. Futhi internationalism is actually a reconciler, because now we are free to practice that which we were not able to practice before. Let us then see it as a way to reconcile ourselves as one nation. Let us teach ourselves, teach each other about our cultures. Let us retain our identities as traditional, as cultural human beings, and move forward into universalism. So if we are to go to a universal state, let us go together hand in hand with traditions and cultures. Even though this has been an era that has been neglected, with the conception of freedom and liberty after colonialization, it is not too late to try to now legitimize, to try to now make a congruent point between culture and modernization. It is clear, however, that legitimacy and acceptability of the model universal human rights regime needs to be complemented with and strengthened with the specific cultural experience of various societies. In the case of Africa, this has been interpreted to mean that the content of human rights, though founded on universal principles, has to bear with what Magawa Mutwa describes as the African cultural fingerprint that emphasizes group duties, social cohesion, and communal solidarity as opposed to rigid individualism. Also, in order for us to achieve this, let us actually have a unified state within our tribes and our cultures first. Once we are able to reprint ourselves as traditional and cultural people, we will then move forward to not having to be seen as backward. Okay, so if we are proud of ourselves and we see ourselves as a group of people who want to move forward with our cultures, let us then legitimate ourselves first in our traditions by practicing our cultures and by being proud of our cultures. Therefore, in that way, we will be able to have a space in the international market, because we are the reason why we don't have full space in our identity as traditional or cultural people, because we run after individualism instead of looking